The clash of bronze echoed like thunder across the plain. Blood soaked the soil, turning earth to mud. Men screamed, not with courage, but with the raw terror of imminent death. In that chaos, the Greeks believed a presence moved. Not Athena, with her clever tactics, not Apollo with his distant arrows, but a force of pure, unthinking violence. They called him Ares. He was the god poets hated, the deity heroes fought, the divine embodiment of war's most brutal truth, the frenzy that turns men into animals. For centuries, he's been dismissed as a mindless brute, a caricature of rage. But to understand Ares is to confront the part of war Greece refused to romanticize, the carnage, the fear, the cost. Today, we move beyond the bias. We'll trace his origins in myth and cult, witness his epic failures and strange honors, and ask why the civilization that perfected warfare despised its divine patron. This is the story of Ares, the most hated god in Greek mythology. His birth was not a celebrated event. According to Hesiod's Theogony, composed around 700 BCE, Ares sprang from Zeus and Hera in a union devoid of joy. Hesiod offers no glorious birth narrative, no prophecy of greatness. The poet simply states his parentage and moves on. This literary dismissal is our first clue. From his earliest textual appearance, Ares occupies an ambiguous space. He is Olympian by birthright, yet his essence feels foreign to the ordered cosmos Zeus built. Scholarly analysis of Indo-European parallels reveals a fascinating split. Many cultures had a dual conception of war, the disciplined, strategic aspect and the chaotic, berserker aspect. The Greeks split this duality into two gods. Athena embodied the former, the general's intellect, the city's defense. Ares embodied the latter, the soldier's bloodlust, the battle's indiscriminate slaughter. This dichotomy was not merely theological, it reflected a deep cultural anxiety. The Greeks were masters of organized warfare, the phalanx, a testament to collective discipline. Ares represented everything that threatened that order: individual rage, uncontrollable fury, the loss of the civilized self. The earliest records contradict later Roman glorification entirely. His name's etymology is uncertain, but some linguists tentatively connect it to a Greek root for ruin or bane. No temples from the geometric or early archaic period celebrate him as a city's founding protector. Instead, his earliest material footprints are chilling. Small, crude lead figurines of warriors, often pierced with nails, have been found at sites like the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia in Sparta. These are not votives for victory. They are cursed tablets binding rituals aimed at enemies, invoking the destructive, chthonic aspect of war's power. This was Ares' first domain, not the glorious battlefield, but the dark magic of intended harm. The material evidence predates the literary tradition of the hated god by centuries. It suggests a figure rooted not in heroism, but in the primal, fearful magic of conflict. Before Homer painted him as a buffoon, communities were already negotiating with his terrifying power through subterranean means. They feared what he represented, so they tried to control it. This tension between fear and necessity would define his entire mythic career. The most devastating portrait of Ares comes from the battlefield of Troy, immortalized in Homer's Iliad from the 8th century BCE. Here, Ares is not merely feared, he is rendered ridiculous. The epic paints him as a blustering, unstrategic force, easily outmaneuvered and physically bested. But to view this as simple mockery misses a profound theological point. Homer uses Ares as a narrative device to explore the cost of pure rage. Let's witness his most infamous hour. The scene is the war's brutal climax. Ares, enraged by the death of his son Ascalaphus, plunges into the fray, ignoring the divine truce. He fights not for Troy or Greece, but for personal vengeance. Donning a cloud of darkness, he rallies the Trojans, his presence alone causing the Greeks to falter. Here, Homer acknowledges his raw power. The earth groans beneath his steps. Yet his intervention is chaotic. Hera and Athena, watching from Olympus, see not a god, but a problem to be solved. Athena, the goddess of tactical war, descends. She finds Diomedes, the Greek hero, and sharpens his vision. She tells him to attack the god himself, a near unthinkable act. Diomedes charges. His spear, guided by Athena, pierces Ares' flesh. The text specifies a detail modern readers often overlook. Ares' scream, Homer writes, was as loud as the shouts of 9,000 or 10,000 warriors. It was a sound of sheer, unadulterated pain, not noble anguish. Wounded, Ares flees the battlefield, ascending to Olympus like a storm cloud retreating. He runs to Zeus, not as a wounded warrior seeking solace, but as a petulant child complaining of unfairness. Zeus rebukes him, calling him the most hateful of all Olympians. This scene serves multiple purposes. Narratively, it establishes Athena's supremacy. Theologically, it condemns war devoid of purpose. Culturally, it reflects the Greek aristocratic value of measured courage over blind fury. Ares represents the side of war that the heroic code, for all its violence, sought to distance itself from. Yet, scholarly analysis reveals complexity. Some Homeric scholars argue this humiliation serves a cathartic function. By making the god of war's terror laughable, the poem momentarily masters the audience's deepest fear. But the laughter is uneasy. The same epic shows Ares' sons, Deimos, Terra, and Phobos, Panic, riding with him. These are not abstract concepts. To the soldier in the line, Terror and Panic were tangible battle-ending forces. Homer demotes their father to a clown, but he cannot erase the reality they represent. The consequences of this literary moment echo through every later tradition. The Roman poet Ovid would later amplify Ares' foolishness, especially in his affair with Aphrodite. But the Greek view was always more conflicted. They laughed at him in epic, but they sacrificed to him in fear at the borders of their world. Beyond the Trojan battlefield, another myth reveals Ares' nature through his vulnerability. This is the story of the Aloidae, the giant twins Otus and Ephialtes. Their tale, preserved in Homer's Odyssey and later expanded, is one of monstrous ambition. They were not typical giants seeking to storm Olympus. Their goal was to pile mountains upon each other to reach the heavens and kidnap goddesses. But first, they decided to capture Ares himself. Imagine the scene. The twins, young but colossal, found the god of war on the plain. The narrative does not describe a grand battle. In some versions, they simply overpowered him. They bound the god of conflict in unbreakable chain, a potent symbol of contained violence. They threw him into a bronze jar, a prison for a deity of the open field. There, Ares languished. For 13 months, the sound of war faded from the world. Peace of a sort descended, but it was a sterile, unnatural peace. The jar became a cosmic pressure cooker. The god's impotent rage simmered within. This episode appears across multiple cultures with significant variations. The detail of the bronze jar is crucial. In Greek ritual, bronze had apotropaic qualities. It was used to ward off evil. Containing Ares in bronze was not just imprisonment, it was a ritual act of neutralizing a dangerous force. The story encodes ritual knowledge in narrative form. It tells us the Greeks believed the spirit of chaotic war could, theoretically, be contained. But not forever. The myth requires a rescuer. In most versions, it is the cunning Hermes, the god of boundaries and thieves, who discovers the secret. Or, in another telling, the giant stepmother Eriboea reveals the prison to Hermes. The messenger god slips in, steals the captive, and frees him. Ares emerges, not triumphant, but diminished. His captivity underscores a fundamental truth about his power. It is essential but intolerable. The world cannot function with perpetual, unchained Ares. Yet a world without him entirely becomes stagnant, vulnerable. He is a necessary evil, perpetually in need of management. Scholarly interpretations of this myth are diverse. Some see it as an allegory for the cyclical nature of war and peace. Others connect it to initiation rituals, where young warriors symbolically confront and master their own violent impulses. The bronze jar might parallel actual vessels used in mystery cults. Whatever its origins, the myth reinforces Ares' ambiguous status. He is powerful enough to be a global threat, yet vulnerable enough to be captured by giants. He is essential to the cosmic order, yet his free presence destroys order. This paradoxical position made him impossible to love, but equally impossible to ignore. If the poet scorned Ares, where did his worship actually happen? The answer lies not in the heart of civilized Athens, but at its margins. Ares was a god of the frontier, of the wild spaces beyond the city wall. His altars were often placed outside city gates or in rugged, untamed landscapes. This liminal placement is telling. He protected the boundary between the polis and chaos, but he himself was not fully of the polis. In Athens, his most famous site was the Areopagus, the hill of Ares. According to myth, this was where Ares was tried by the gods for the murder of Poseidon's son, Halirrhothios, who had assaulted Ares' daughter Alcippe. Ares was acquitted, establishing the hill as a court for murder trials. The myth sanctifies a real-world legal institution, linking the brutal justice of blood feud to civic law. Archaeology supports this peripheral yet integrated role. Votive offerings show continuity across centuries of political upheaval. At the sanctuary of Ares at Acharnae in Attica, excavations revealed offerings not of weapons, but of dogs. Dogs were associated with Ares, possibly as scavengers of the battlefield or as symbols of raw, instinctual fury. This connects back to those early Spartan lead figurines. The worship was often grim, tied to the ugly aftermath of conflict. Then there is Sparta, the profound exception. In the society that perfected militarism, Ares was not a joke. He was a central, revered deity. Spartans saw no contradiction between disciplined warfare and honoring the god of frenzy. To them, the controlled release of violent potential was the essence of their system. Before battle, Spartan armies would sacrifice to Ares. The historian Xenophon, in the 4th century BCE, records that Spartan kings maintained a sacred regiment dedicated to the god. The iconography evolves dramatically between archaic and classical periods elsewhere. But in Sparta, it remains consistently martial. The most striking evidence is the ritual of the Crypteia, the secret police where Spartan youths were sent to terrorize and kill Helot slaves. Many scholars interpret this as a rite of passage dedicated to Ares, a controlled channeling of his terrifying antisocial violence into state service. Here, Ares was not the enemy of order, but its dark enforcer. This Spartan embrace highlights the cultural relativity of divine perception. What Athens feared and marginalized, Sparta harnessed. Material culture contradicts the timeline established by poetic texts. While Homer mocked Ares, real people in borderlands and military states were building his altars. They understood that alongside Athena's strategy, there had to be an acknowledgement of the battle madness that actually won the fight. They worshipped not the caricature, but the necessary terror. The story of Ares does not end with Greece. His most profound transformation came through Roman conquest. The Romans syncretized or blended him with their god Mars. But this was no simple rename. Mars was a fundamentally different being. He was a god of agriculture before war, a father of the Roman people, a civic protector. Where Ares was an outsider, Mars was central to Rome's founding myth. This syncretism created a lasting confusion. Renaissance art and modern popular culture often project the noble, paternal Mars back onto the Greek Ares, fundamentally distorting him. The Roman poet Ovid, writing in the 1st century CE, further cemented the humorous, adulterous Ares of the Aphrodite affair, making him a stock character of ridicule. Yet mystical and philosophical traditions preserved a more complex view. The Neoplatonists of the late Roman Empire saw Ares as a necessary cosmic force. He represented the dynamic, separating principle that allowed for individual existence and conflict, the opposite of unifying love. In this schema, he was not evil, but a crucial part of the universe's structure. His documented influence contradicts his supposed marginal status. During the Hellenistic period, his worship spread with Alexander's armies, often merging with local warrior gods across the Middle East. The tradition fragmented during Christianization, but his archetype never died. The medieval concept of the knight battling his own rage, the Renaissance exploration of furor in art, the modern psychological understanding of combat stress all echo the ancient negotiation with Ares' domain. Modern scholarship has systematically overturned earlier consensus that saw him as a purely negative figure. Archaeologists now point to the prevalence of his cults in colonies and border regions as evidence of his vital protective role. Historians of religion analyze his myths as narratives about managing the unspeakable trauma of battle. The pattern continues in forms scholars are actively documenting now. He appears in the analysis of veterans' experiences, in the study of how societies ritualize violence, in the enduring appeal of the anti-hero who embodies raw power. Ares was the Greek attempt to name, contain, and occasionally mock the part of human experience that is ultimately ungovernable. So why does Ares, the hated god, still fascinate? He endures because he is the most honest deity in the Greek pantheon. Aphrodite masks desire with beauty. Zeus cloaks power in law. Athena sanitizes violence with strategy. Ares alone refuses to lie. He is battle rage, panic, terror, and the stench of the field. The Greeks, for all their civilization, knew this truth intimately. They hated him because they recognized him. In a culture that celebrated the beautiful death, the glorious kleos of the hero, Ares represented the ugly, anonymous death that was far more common. He was the psychological cost they preferred not to name in their epics, but could not ignore in their lives. His legacy is not one of temples and grand festivals, but of whispered prayers at border shrines and the tense rituals before the phalanx marched. The influence extends into domains historians rarely examine directly. The psychology of violence, the literature of trauma, the aesthetics of the grotesque in art. From the berserkers of Norse myth to the frenzied warriors in modern fantasy, the archetype recurs. He is the shadow twin of every noble war god. Contemporary reclamations in modern pagan and occult traditions often focus on this honesty. They see in Ares a god who does not judge the dark emotions of anger and survival instinct, but who embodies them as natural forces. This is not a glorification of war, but an acknowledgement of its deepest, most personal reality. The Greek treatment of Ares, mocking him in poetry, fearing him in cult, harnessing him in Sparta, shows a profound and nuanced understanding. They knew that what you mock, you also fear. What you fear, you must ritualize. What you ritualize, you can perhaps control. Ares was their attempt to control the uncontrollable. In the end, he is the god who looks directly at the Gorgon's head of human conflict without turning to stone. He is the reminder that for all our strategies and codes, war at its core is a descent into a primal scream. The Greeks hated that scream, but they were wise enough to give it a name and a place, however uncomfortable, among their gods. Ares' story is not one of redemption, but of recognition. The Greeks did not need to love him to understand his necessity. They built their civilization through war, yet they possessed the profound self-awareness to distrust its divine embodiment. They placed him at their borders, both physical and psychological. In mocking Ares, they warned themselves. In fearing him, they respected his power. In worshipping him selectively, they sought to placate a force they could never eliminate. He stands as a permanent counterpoint to the gleaming ideals of Olympus, the dark, roaring truth in the basement of the Greek soul. His endurance in myth, art, and now psychological discourse proves that some truths are too fundamental to be prayed away. They can only be named, contained, and endlessly negotiated. From the bronze jar of myth to the veteran's heart, the negotiation continues.